The message from my family arrived without warning, and in a single moment it erased years of sacrifice with one cold sentence. It simply read, "We need distance from you, so please stop contacting us completely." And as I stared at those words glowing on my phone, I realized they had no idea that this decision would change all of our lives forever. Instead of begging for another chance or trying to defend myself, I quietly replied with the calmest message I had ever written and placed my phone face down on the table. I didn't cry, I didn't argue, and I didn't chase after people who had already decided I wasn't worth keeping. My name is Mave Whitlock, and for most of my life I believed being dependable was the greatest gift I could offer the people I loved. I worked in payroll at a medical center where every number had to be accurate, yet somehow I never noticed how badly the numbers in my own life had been draining me. My apartment was modest but peaceful, filled with neatly organized paperwork, carefully planned budgets, and the quiet comfort that came from living within my means. The only reason I could never get ahead was because my family constantly expected me to carry responsibilities that belonged to them. My mother, Linda, often repeated that family should always help family, while my father, Robert, turned every financial conversation into a lecture about loyalty and gratitude. My younger sister Nora treated my bank account like an emergency fund that existed solely for her convenience. Every holiday, birthday, or ordinary weekend eventually became another request for money disguised as love. Whenever I hesitated, I was reminded that I was the responsible one, and somehow responsibility always meant paying everyone else's bills. For years, I convinced myself this was simply how families worked, even though every transfer left me postponing my own dreams. Vacations disappeared, savings stalled, and opportunities slipped away while everyone around me continued living comfortably. The only person who never asked me for anything was my Uncle Grant, who owned a small moving company across town. He rarely offered advice, but he watched everything with the quiet patience of someone who understood people better than they understood themselves. Everything changed the evening Nora casually announced she wanted a more expensive apartment because she deserved a better neighborhood. Without even looking up from her phone, she asked me to cover the security deposit as though the answer had already been decided. For the first time in years, I simply said no without apologizing or explaining myself. The room fell silent. My parents exchanged disappointed looks, and within seconds I had somehow become the selfish villain in a story I hadn't written. 2 days later my office phone rang while I was working, and my parents' landlord thanked me for renewing payment arrangements I had never approved. That was the moment I discovered my family had shared my work information without permission just to make collecting money easier. I drove straight to their apartment after work, hoping an honest conversation could finally clear the air between us. Instead, every concern I raised was dismissed with sarcasm, blame, and the familiar accusation that I cared more about money than family. The following afternoon, the family group chat delivered the message that finally shattered every illusion I had been protecting. They announced they wanted complete distance from me and instructed me never to contact them again. The silence that followed wasn't painful the way I expected it to be because something inside me had finally stopped fighting reality. For the first time, I accepted that I could not save relationships built entirely on what I was willing to provide. An hour later, Uncle Grant called and quietly explained that my parents were packing everything because they planned to move without telling me where they were going. Before hanging up, he promised he would return anything that actually belonged to me. That evening, I spread years of receipts across my living room floor, ranging every payment by category until the pattern became impossible to ignore. Housing, utilities, groceries, insurance, medical bills, subscriptions, and countless emergencies told the true story of where my future had disappeared. Looking at those stacks of paper, I realized I hadn't been supporting my family out of love anymore, but out of fear that saying no would cost me their affection. The heartbreaking truth was that my affection had already been costing me everything. My closest friend Elias came over after work, sat beside me without judgment, and quietly asked me to show him everything I had been carrying alone. As he flipped through years of receipts, he looked at me with genuine sadness and said no one should mistake exploitation for love. The next morning, my therapist reminded me that ending unhealthy financial dependence wasn't abandonment, but an act of self-preservation. Those words settled into my heart with a peace I had never experienced before. Rather than responding emotionally, I prepared a clear summary of every payment I had been making on behalf of my family for years. I attached copies of the records and informed everyone that every automatic payment would end within 30 days, so they could transfer each account into their own names. Only minutes passed before panic flooded the group chat, replacing anger with confusion and desperate excuses. Suddenly the same people who had demanded distance insisted they hadn't meant financial distance at all. My parents accused me of weaponizing money, while Nora insisted I was ruining her future simply because I refused to continue paying for it. I answered only once by reminding them that I was respecting the exact boundaries they had asked for. Later that evening, Uncle Grant delivered several unopened boxes containing household items I had purchased years earlier that had never even been unpacked. Seeing those forgotten gifts hurt less than realizing how invisible my efforts had always been. As the days passed, the family's messages slowly shifted from insults to pleading, but I refused to reopen a chapter that had already cost me too much. I wished them well, encouraged them to build independent lives, and quietly continued rebuilding my own. Weeks later, my apartment felt different because the constant anxiety had finally disappeared from every room. I cooked dinner without interruption, slept through the night without worrying about emergency phone calls, and began imagining a future that belonged entirely to me. Looking back now, I understand that the cruelest betrayal wasn't the text telling me to stay away, but the years I spent believing my worth depended on what I could give away. The day my family pushed me out was the day I finally walked toward the life I should have been living all along, and losing their approval became the first step toward finding my own peace.